死ね。神の怒りに焼き貫かれて。Megiddo!
If you clicked on this video, then you are in one of three camps. You've either watched That Time I Got Reincarnated as a slime and firmly believe that Rimuru is a war criminal, and you're sharpening Gorikumari Kai so you can attempt to luff up my head for thinking otherwise. Or you have watched Tense's slime and completely agree with me, in which case you're waiting for me to add to or reinforce arguments that you already know that confirm that Rimuru isn't a war criminal. Or you've never watched That Time I Got Reincarnated as a slime and you have no idea what I'm talking about, but you'd like to. If anything, because you wonder if maybe I'm about to introduce you to one of the most mind-blowing and yet utterly chill isekai stories you've ever read or watched, and you know what? You would be right. But before we get started, hi, I'm Noria, and this channel chronicles my life as a nerd. If you want to, then consider subscribing, turn on post notifications, and don't forget to like this video. Now back to the video. 3 to 4 years ago, my best friend introduced me to an isekai light novel that became one of my absolute favorite stories ever, Tensei Shitara Slime Dateken, also called That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. I watched the anime, read the manga, read the web novel first. I know, travesty.
No, I don't think you understand. I'm obsessed.
And when I was finished with the web novel, I read the light novels, I was hooked. Now, if you're someone who unfortunately has never watched the anime or read this story, whether as a light novel or in its manga format, and yes, I use the term unfortunately because it really is an unfortunate thing indeed if you've never read, watched, or even heard of Tensei Slime, then to give you a quick summary, That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime follows Satoru Mikami, who at 37 years old is working a corporate job and living an average, fairly comfortable life, until stabbed whilst trying to protect his junior from the office and dies as a result of it. However, because of his virgin status and several thoughts he has as he's dying, he gains powers after his death as he's transmigrated into another world where he befriends the storm dragon Veldora, gains the name Rimuru Tempest, and sets out to experience a world foreign to him, but one that he tries to afford all the comfort of home. And in the process, he finds himself ruling a nation of monsters, befriending demon lords, and minor spoiler alert, becomes one himself. If you're like me in that you two were glued to your PC in the late 90s and early 2000s when the Age of Empires game was first released, then you will love That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, especially as you watch Rimuru Tempest Nation slowly grow from being a small settlement to eventually the epicenter of the world in which the story is told. That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is a story that focuses on Rimuru Tempest and his mostly pacifist ways as he builds Rimuru Tempest Nation and amasses a following of monsters who are terrifyingly loyal to him, as terrifyingly loyal as they are strong. And he in turn, although he never signed up to rule anybody, rises to the occasion in the most brilliant of ways. And he does all this as, just as in case you never guessed it, as a slime. Go figure. Now, it is in one of those occasions where he rose to become such a leader that this topic of controversy arose. Now, before I start, I would like to say that there will be spoilers for the first half of the second season of the anime. If you don't want any spoilers at all, drop off now and you can go watch or read That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime. If you don't mind spoilers, then please settle right in. This might convince you to read the story. Now, the controversy that's been swirling for years in the fandom is mostly focused on what happened with the army of Falmuth. After the money-grabbing, greedy as fuck King Edmaris of Falmuth decides to lose all reason and common sense and attack Rimuru Tempest Nation in the most underhanded, shadiest of ways, his entire army gets clapped. They die. They become food for Rimuru in his ascension to godhood, or in more layman terms, his ascension to becoming a demon king. However, this ascension or descent, whatever you choose to call it, is not one that he attempts willingly. Circumstances push him to consider and follow through with this course of action for the sake of his people. And I think in conversations about whether or not Rimuru is a war criminal, a lot of people forget this very important point. Now, before I get any further, I would like to say that my talk about Rimuru being or not being a war criminal has no bearing to the real world situation that is currently happening, especially because we can all attest to the fact that there is currently no world leader who is a slime with magical powers, whose country was invaded by a conquering force seeking to implement their will and religion on the country and raiding it for all it's worth. That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime is a work of fiction, and as such, please keep that in mind whilst watching this video. And with that said, let's move back to the video and the arguments often raised when people comment about Rimuru's war criminal status. First of which often starts with them quoting the Geneva Convention and stating that Rimuru, in killing the Falmuth soldiers, didn't follow the rules of the convention with regards to the treatment of prisoners of war, which the soldiers subsequently became when Rimuru arrived at the place they had camped in preparation for their second attack on his city. And in answer to that, the first thing that always pops into my head is, this is a bloody work of fiction. Attempting to use real-life arguments and scenarios in a fantasy story makes zero sense. The Geneva Convention doesn't exist in the fictional world where Rimuru is a slime whose best friend is a dragon and whose subordinates are Kijins, dwarves, demon foxes, reanimated corpses, and insectors. But if we are participating in this bad faith argument of trying to bring the standards that apply to reality into fantasy, then why stop only at the Geneva Convention? We should also then consider Article 51 of the UN Charter, which preserves the inherent right of a sovereign nation to defend itself when an armed attack occurs against them by an enemy state. And by the Kingdom of Falmuth's own admission, both when they were planning the attack with the church, mind you, to destroy and eventually subjugate the innocent nation of monsters, just because they wanted the wealth present within the nation. And when we saw the armies of Falmuth joking about all the things they could steal and the female monsters they could play with, one could very easily and obviously deduce that in this instance, Falmuth is an enemy state attacking the self-governing and sovereign country of Jura Tempest Federation. Thus, one would say that the act of Rimuru and his generals setting out to wipe out the invading force is an act of self-defense employed to protect their country. After all, if the Kingdom of Falmuth had made it back to Jura Tempest, they would have killed even more of the monsters who hadn't done anything wrong. They just wanted to coexist with humans like their leader Rimuru wanted. It was the promise he had gotten from them after he had set up Jura Tempest that they would never attack humans that made them easy prey to be attacked by a nation like Falmuth. A fact, mind you, that Rimuru recognized, and one that contributed further to the feeling of guilt he felt at the massacre and why he felt he had to take direct responsibility. We also have to consider that the first showing of Falmuth, where they sent otherworlders to cause trouble in Jura Tempest and then followed it up by riding in with a fraction of their army and slaughtering men, women, and children, was a show of power. It's why the commander of the army, Forgen, after the slaughter, informed the citizens of Tempest that the army would be back to kill them all if they didn't surrender. That was a declaration of war, if anyone ever heard it. And I think a lot of people who attempt to deny that or think that that act is something that can be forgiven don't have a history of their people being invaded and conquered by an enemy force. Because if you're African, African American, South American, Welsh, Scottish, Indigenous, Chinese, Korean, the list is quite endless. Then the burning desire to have Falmuth not succeed and to have them pay is something that would further add to justifying Rimuru's actions. The second argument, often raised by people who believe Rimuru is a war criminal, is often that the soldiers of Falmuth surrendered. After Rimuru had killed about a third of the camp with ease using Megiddo, they dropped on their knees and surrendered. And honestly, I can see why people would think that. But now that we've established that it makes no sense to apply the rules of our reality into a fantasy world, then it's only logical that if we're judging Rimuru's actions and behaviors in this world, then this judgment should follow the rules in the fictional world wherein Rimuru lives. And our first glimpse into the rule that guides this universe was after the battle with the Orc Lord, at the meeting where the Jura Tempest Alliance was established, when Benimaru reminds those gathered and informs us, the audience, that the rule that governs their world is the survival of the fittest. In a world filled with monsters, it's only the strong that can survive, and it is unto the strong that lies the responsibility of determining and deciding the fate of those who lost. And in the case of the soldiers of Falmuth, well, Rimuru made his decision that they should die and their souls gleaned. Do I think it's fair? I guess fairness is relative when they are injured parties on different sides. For the citizens of Jura Tempest Federation, that was more than fair. To the soldiers of Falmuth, not so much. However, unfortunately for them, their death was to serve Rimuru, and they weren't strong enough to avoid that. That is the unbroken, unshaken rule of the world that the story exists within. The third and final argument often raised is that the soldiers of Falmuth had lost all will to fight, that Rimuru had completely broken them with the massacre of a third of the soldiers, and that should have been enough. Now, I personally think that the third argument, although almost intertwined with the second, is slightly different. One can definitely surrender without one's spirit being utterly broken. So I get why some people think that this is a valid argument. However, once again, it makes zero sense to me. The soldiers of Falmouth losing their will to fight is all well and good, but wouldn't unfortunately serve to accomplish what Rimuru set out to do, which is resurrect every single one of his people who had been killed by the army of Falmouth. And I think that that is something that a lot of people seem to forget when they make this argument. I'm assuming that they forgot, because the alternative for me would be much worse. That they legit believe that Rimuru would let bygones be bygones, forgive the army of Falmouth, let the army go back home, and leave his people dead. In what universe is that going to happen? In what universe does that make any sense? The minute Eren mentioned to Rimuru that there is a slight chance he could bring his people back to life should he become a demon lord by consuming 20,000 human souls, and Rimuru discovers that the army of Falmouth that was at the moment marching to Jura Tempest Federation to kill even more of his people has exactly the number of human souls he needs. It seems like it was ordained. I am fairly certain that Fuse, when he was writing the story, assumed everyone would come to that logical conclusion, that the people responsible for the loss of lives at Jura Tempest Federation will, by dying, bring those lives back. It is serendipitous. It is perfection. And it only makes sense that, of course, Rimuru would choose his people over the invading force that killed them. And the reason we know this is because, minor spoiler for occurrence in the light novel, I will try not to give much detail. So if you haven't read the light novel, you aren't spoiled. But if you don't want even a whiff of spoiler, then skip to this part of the video. I'll put the timestamp somewhere around here. But I was saying, the reason we know that the reason Rimuru completely wiped out the Falmouth army is because he needed to bring his people back to life, is because when he had yet another chance to do so, to wipe out another army, when Jura Tempest faced yet another invasion, Rimuru spared that army. Why? Because his people were safe. Because it is only when the monsters and humans of Jura Tempest Nation, the ones who have put their lives and well-being and love and trust into Rimuru, are in danger, that is when he rises to become a relentless and unrepentant monster who will see everyone else dead to keep his people safe. And to be honest, even with that, Rimuru is quite merciful. I think sometimes because it's the adorable slime we collectively love, people sometimes forget that Rimuru Tempest is a demon lord in the leagues of Guy and Milim and Drago and Luminous and Leon and Dino, and yes, she's adorable, but she's still powerful in her realm, Ramirez. I think sometimes people forget what it means to be a demon lord in that universe, and that although Rimuru is probably the nicest of the lot, he is still a demon lord, and sometimes it takes the wiping out of an entire army to ensure that we never forget that.